Good afternoon, everyone. You knew it was going to come. They were going to repeal ethanol mandates to put more food on the street so you don't go to the street. Speaking of streets, Connecticut, 17.5 cents per mile on heavy vehicles. That's passed down to you. Forget the supply chain bottlenecks. How about manufacturing bottlenecks? The last chip supplier on the planet just went down. Forget the supply chain if you can't make anything. That's why buying conditions for homes, durables, vehicles at record unhappiness levels from the University of Michigan. New studies show that by the time people reach their middle ages, the body often produces less than half of the collagen it did in their youth. Collagen is the main building block in our skin, making up 70 to 80% of it. This is why we get sagging skin and wrinkles as we age. If you want to look younger, you must supplement collagen, which will improve your skin's elasticity, make it smoother, more plump, and more youthful looking. That's why Ageless Multi-Collagen provides 5 key types of collagen you need from 4 different sources, essential to optimally support an array of full-body benefits. No odor, no taste, no clumping, unlike other collagen supplements. And this is why I recommend Health with Adapt 2030. Ageless Multi-Collagen, and look at that, I need another bag already. Quick way for youthful appearance. Use the link in the description box below for 51% off my favorite Ageless Multi-Collagen. And now on with the video. You knew it was coming. With all the record food price increases through history, when food gets too expensive, people go to the streets, they ask for change. Now suddenly, labor unions are saying, hey, repeal the biofuel limits. And of course, the administration's pretending like, oh, we're pushing back, oh, we're being forced to. No, they're not. Looks good on paper, the congressional volume target for renewable fuels. Wow, they just give you the cellulosic advanced biodiesel renewables, and you're like, wow, that's confusing. What are the D3, D5, D4, D6 levels? They take food and they turn it into fuel and they throw it in your gas tank by law under duress. And that's your food supply by law going into a gas tank. Well, suddenly, we see some of these rules that require refiners to blend billions of gallons of ethanol and biofuels into our fuel supply. They're lifting their mandates. What a surprise as food and commodities hit all-time highs. Did you think there would not be a pushback against this? So just like there's carbon credits, there's also renewable identification number credits, which allow refiners to juggle renewable fuel blends and on trade or pass amongst each other. So let's look into these categories of renewable fuels. D3, D7, cellulosic, anything with cell walls, think pulp, paper pulp, that type of thing. Grasses, inedible plants. But then we come down into the D4, 5, and 6 blends. These are the ones that are affecting your food prices. Biodiesel is where they'll actually take an oil seed. There's so many. Take that oil from it. Now we can use soy oil, canola oil, and there's an enormous amount of other oils that are blended into the biodiesel regime. Sugar-based is sugarcane or sugar beets. There are some tuber and root crops that produce an enormous amount of sugar. And then corn. But 16.5 billion gallons of your food being turned into a liquid to then by law be pushed through a supply chain. And the question would be, who gained from all of that transition of movement into the biofuel era, 2008 and 9 in the last commodities super cycle? How many mandates were put in? Remember when Bush was talking about switchgrass, cellulosic ethanol, and then all the mandates that were put, and then how many millions of acres of food production was taken offline into producing corn for ethanol. And then all the ethanol plants that magically popped out of nowhere. Who do you think were the contractors and who benefited the most from that? So you see this twist in society now. The food's getting so expensive that now they're going to roll back the ethanol mandates. You knew this was coming. This was part of the plan. I mean, how many conversations that I had with Christian or Diamond, others about the same thing, that when the food became too expensive, they were going to roll back the ethanol mandate. Okay, that bought a little more time. Forcing everybody to cook at home during the lockdowns. That bought a little more time. Closing all the restaurants, all the food and bev, all that food waste. You know, it was about 15% of all the food in America was wasted through those means. Most of it was cut down. People are cooking at home. Okay, it bought a little more time. We've reached that crux point now where food was getting incredibly expensive, and now the ethanol mandates have been removed. Okay, that's the last stop. There's nothing more past that except rationing. So that's great that they did it, but how much time did it buy? 61 billion gallons of, corn converted into a liquid. Okay, and replant that, because you're not going to be eating ethanol bearing corn as a human. We're going to need to retool that and put a new seed variety in there for human consumption. As you're starting to see, a lot of animal herds are getting culled, sold off, never repopulated, so the amount of animal feed dropping as well. Seems to be a well-coordinated plan to reduce the amount of input into the full food system moving forward, especially with larger animals, cows, pigs, you. Now onto the roads here. Connecticut enacting a highway fee for trucks. And you might say, okay, well, I've been on a turnpike before. This is just a little bit different. Every mile that a delivery vehicle transits on Connecticut roads to bring food, medicine, building supplies, or whatever else our lives need, are going to be charged an additional 17.5 cents per mile. It's the most exorbitant in the United States. And if you think it's going to be the only one, and we're heading into this great reset, and you can see all these things swinging in motion here together, one truck driver interviewed by Freight Waves said that road tax is going to cost an extra $200,000 for operational costs. You either pass it along or you go out of business. And you know the whole great reset's about taking all the vehicles off the road and replacing them with multiple choice answer, A, B, C. What do you choose? So I linked a PDF below that was related right to this highway trust fund and taxes. Now this comes from the Congressional Budget Office and the Internal Revenue Service on the Federal Highway Administration. I did not know general taxes on fuels, just in general for me, you, and everybody running around the streets here, has this many billions of dollars in tax included in. And then the taxes on diesel and alternative fuels are something else. Then you got taxes on trailers and taxes on taxes. Then you got tax on the tax on the tax, and then you get tax because of the tax, and you have to pay that tax as a value-added tax on the other tax, which leaves you little money to spend because you're spending so much on regulation fees. And yet another one on top of that, plus the high food prices, plus these delivery costs, bankrupting and stopping supplies from reaching final destination. Now, the effective date of this from the article here, January 1st, 2023. So it still gives another whole year, almost and a half, on the highway usage routes per mile. And the lowest that was going to be on there for a gross weight 26,000 pound vehicle would be 2.5 cents per extra mile. But then when you get up to the 80,000 pound range, and you know the weigh stations are going to be kicking into overdrive in every single vehicle. Before it was, a little spot checking here and there to make sure you're not overweight on what your paperwork was saying. Okay, you see the weigh stations are open occasionally. I guarantee 100% are going to be manned 100% of the time, and 100% of the trucks are going to be required 100% of the time to stop so they can collect 100% of the tax. Is that too far-fetched? Oh, it's creating jobs. We all need new jobs in the new economy. We're transitioning. And how do you think that's going to affect the economy now? One state, great. And as I was reading through a few articles, there are a few other states that also have road taxes specifically by the mile for wear and tear. 17.5 cents, that's hefty. What happens when every country does it? Every state does it? And what if it's 17.5 cents in Connecticut and then it's 50 cents in California? It's always like this. If you notice, once the first state does something, it gains traction, or the first country in the world does something, it gains traction. El Salvador with the Bitcoin. Cuba's now cutting US dollars. They're probably going to jump to Bitcoin as a settlement medium as well. There's always a second and a third. Connecticut's kind of a dangerous precedent with the road tax, the Great Reset. You can see how this is all dovetailing in together. And how much is too much before drivers in earnest stop driving? And then at what percentage does it really affect the things coming into the stores? These are kind of calculations that would need to be done to see how much time is truly on the horizon for reduction in food production globally, as we're starting to see now. So all these other chess pieces are being moved around. But that's the strangest one for me, is the road tax now on top of taxes, and things are getting so expensive, yet they want to put more tax and take more money out of the pockets, which is not really being lined at such a raise of the inflation rate. So something very interesting is going on here in Connecticut. I don't know what it is, but if it sweeps the country, that is another control mechanism. It's not about saving the roads. University of Michigan, bad buying conditions. This is the optimism of looking at a new purchase, your home, a car, or some appliances, the durables. The higher the score, the less optimism there is. Picture's worth 1,000 words, I think, on this one. And those of you who have or have not been following Taiwan, the luckiest country on the planet, almost no COVID, up until a few weeks ago. Problem was, they were substantially ramping up their semiconductor production, one of the last bastions of semiconductor production on the planet, unimpeded by all the lockdowns that have occurred. And suddenly, they have the biggest amount of cases, and wow, everything's locked down. It is so interesting in the reset when they have to stop production, and you think, stop production? And most people have it backward. You know, the deflection's over on the supply chain side of things. How many thousands and thousands of articles have we seen about supply chain constraints, super high charter rates for varying size of vessels going across the oceans? It's all focused on the supply chain side of bottleneck. You need to be looking over this direction. If you don't have the semiconductor chips, you can't produce anything. So the supply chain constraints are nothing to even think about. That's a moot point when the base driver of automobiles, electric cars, refrigerators, everything in between, everything is electronic with a semiconductor chip in it today, even down to your coffee maker and your blender. Do you think those 25,000 Ford vehicles sitting out there, and now they're idling different factories because there's a couple 100,000 cars they can't complete because they don't have the semiconductor chips? You think Tesla's sitting idle with their production because why? Supply chains don't matter anymore if you can't get the semiconductor chips. Where are they going to come from? Now the last place that was really producing that was an unimpeded flow, Taiwan, closed. TSMC, they closed their factories. So now what? Where's the additional chip supply going to come from? And how much is that going to affect manufacturing? So when they say supply chain disruption, how about initial production disruption? Should be the new tune. But again, the deflection's over there when you should be looking that direction. And if you thought these constraints in everything that we're seeing, from food to taxes to the actual final finished products, do you think you might need a little bit of storable food to get ready for some of these expected events in our lives marching at us as a tidal wave? My Patriot Supply and Adapt 2030, the 2-week or the 4-week emergency food supply. That link's in the description box below. They also have 1 month, 6 month, and 1 year supplies. And it's a great way to give yourself peace of mind knowing that you have storable food, so you don't have to go out and you can wait a few extra days or weeks before you need to emerge out into the chaos, if there is any. Plus, it's a great way to support the channel here at Adapt 2030 so I can bring you more research just like this. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you next time.